say hi in the chat. Let us know where you work, where you're joining from, and we'll just give people a minute or two to arrive. I'm assuming it's still quite sunny everywhere, but if it's not where you are, let us know if you're cooler than the rest of us. Hi, Alice. Thanks for joining. Hi, Emily. Hi, Charlotte. From Leeds, what's the weather like in Leeds, Alice? Is it nice? I'm from Birmingham. Hi, Rob. Okay, we'll get going in just a minute. Oh, it's still nice. Good. Hi, Anna from the Wirral. Hi, Mandy. Oh, it's even sunny up in Yorkshire. We've got sun all over the UK. Fantastic. Okay, so we'll get going now. Thanks for joining us for this 45-minute session. If you haven't joined any of our webinars before, we run them on the last Monday of every month. And the reason we put these together is to kind of share. We've got so many different topics that we work in Social for Good, all around social media, and the vast majority of it is for charities, although we do work with some purpose-driven brands as well. And these social snapshot webinars are literally a snapshot into some of the work that we do. So we really hope that through our series of webinars, we're adding value, we're making your role a little bit easier, generating some ideas to help social make a bigger impact. So I hope you get a lot out of today. I'll just tell you a little bit about Social for Good and what we do. We are never able to get a team picture with everybody in it, but this is nearly everybody. We're missing 2 people who are off sick, but we're a Brighton-based social media agency. We empower charities and purpose-driven brands with ethical and strategic social media support to make a positive impact. So we work with the good guys. If you're doing something good in the world, then we want to help you maximize the work that you're doing through social. We have experience with strategies, training programs, influencer work, organic and paid social, really the whole of the social landscape, but it's always got that focus on doing good and purpose. So there will be an opportunity to ask Ramin, Dome and myself any questions at the end of this webinar. But I'm going to hand over to my lovely colleague Ramin now, who is going to talk about accessibility, and I'll see you guys in a bit. But over to you, Ramin.
Thanks, Kerry. As Kerry said, hi everyone, I'm Ramin. I always say, like the Japanese noodles, if that helps break the ice a little. But I am a social media manager and strategist at Social for Good. And today I'll be walking you through all things accessibility in this webinar today. So in this webinar, we'll cover 3 kind of areas to understand accessibility. So first, what is accessibility? So unpacking what it actually is. Then we're going to jump and cover 5 kind of key areas of accessibility. So uncovering what they are, how to implement them, and also how to make sure that they're optimal for the audiences that we want them to be of use to. And then finally, we'll run through 3 common accessibility mistakes that we see cropping up kind of within the clients that we're supporting and we help with, and also give some recommendations on how you can avoid making those mistakes and get it right from the start. But to first kick things off, it'd be great to understand where all of you are at with your accessibility practices at the moment. And so there should be a poll that's popped up. And if you could answer the question, how often do you use accessibility features in your content at the moment? If you type the number that correlates with your response, we can see the poll votes coming through. So I'll give you a few moments to, I think, respond to some of the questions. Okay, some 3s, some 2s, some sometimes is, fairly consistently. Okay. Well, thank you. No, that's good to know. I think with all the responses that we've got so far, hopefully all of you will walk away with at least one new learning that you can apply in terms of accessibility, just to kind of raise up how consistently you're using accessibility features in your content. So thank you all so much. And we'll jump straight into actually understanding what accessibility is. So first, we'll set the scene. So in the context of the UK, 1 in 4 people live with a disability. 1 in 3 are deaf, have hearing loss, or experience tinnitus. Over 2 million live with sight loss, and about 4.5% of the population have color blindness. And these stats give us a glimpse at the kind of the widespread numbers and communities that could really benefit from inclusive practices like accessibility being more common in our everyday, like in our social media content. So in that context, accessibility is overall the practice of developing social media posts that everyone can perceive, understand, and engage with. And it doesn't always just cover physical disability and supporting those with physical disability, but it also covers visual, auditory, and cognitive impairments. Accessibility features in social media can actually also benefit non-disabled communities, which is known as the curb cut effect. So, for example, captions, which are normally there to help those who are hard of hearing, can actually also end up helping non-native speakers understand a piece of video content that you may have shared. Similarly, alt text, which are typically there to help those with visual impairments, can be read, if an image isn't loading for whatever reason on someone's feed. Alt text can help them get the context of the image without the image actually having to be there. And for you itself as an organization, when you develop accessible content, it ultimately helps your social media performance, because you expand the kind of the net of people that your content can reach and be visible to, expanding your reach, and in turn the potential engagement that your content can attract. And in terms of brand reputation as well, if audiences see you regularly practicing inclusive and values of care in your content by embedding accessible features within your content, it can help improve your brand reputation and have like a good kind of trustworthy image to your brand organization in the long run. So there's all sorts of different benefits to why accessibility is so key to kind of your social media practice in the everyday. And we'll jump straight into a couple of the features of accessibility. There's all sorts of different accessibility features that you can cover, but in this webinar, we'll cover the 5 kind of main ones that we really focus on when we come to developing content as social media managers, or recommending when it comes to our strategy support as well with our clients. So the first one is alt text, which you may already be familiar with, but for those of you who aren't, alt text is a description of an image or a graphic in digital content, like in social media posts. And it may be a little bit small, but there is an example from Guide Dogs UK on the right here, where each of the 4 posts that photos that they've shared in this post to do with dogs, they each have an alt text description. And this is added to like the end of their Facebook caption. And alt text is typically read aloud by assistive tech, known as like screen readers, which are used by people with vision impairments. And these screen readers read out the alt text description, and it helps people with vision impairments ultimately understand what an image or graphic is and get the kind of the full context of the post without actually having to see said image or graphic. On the right here as well is another example by RNIB on how they've added alt text to the images in their TikTok carousel. RNIB is actually a really good source to look at on their socials for any kind of tips for accessibility practices, especially when it comes to supporting people with visual impairments. So definitely one I recommend kind of having a snoop through after this webinar. But when it comes to writing alt text, it's really important that you prioritize clarity just to help get across the actual description of the image and graphic as clearly and succinctly as possible. So there's a couple of tips that we recommend to help keep alt text ultimately optimal when you're writing them. The first being to keep it concise. So a couple sentences, 2-3 sentences, where you're focusing on the main descriptions and not necessarily like the extra details which are needed for the sake of the context. Another tip for clarity is also to use punctuation sparingly. It also encourages you to kind of keep content as your sentences as concise as possible. Like I mentioned earlier, stick to describing core information. So stuff like if you've got text in a graphic, get that across in your alt text description. Avoid unnecessary detail like explaining the shade of blue if you've got that in your graphic, which is not that necessary for the context. And don't repeat information that's elsewhere, again, to help you keep your alt text description concise. If you've already said a piece of information in the caption that the users will have already been able to read through their screen readers, you don't necessarily need to repeat it within the alt text description itself. And when it comes to adding alt text really positively, a lot of the mainstream social media platforms nowadays, they actually all have alt text features where you can embed the descriptions directly into the post that you're uploading. So for example, here on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, when you upload an image or a selection of images, you will typically get a settings or like a more options button where you can click through and add in the alt text for each corresponding image. Similarly, on LinkedIn, when you go to upload an image or a graphic, you will have an alt text button that pops up within the kind of the upload section where you can add it there. And for short form platforms like X, Threads, and Blue Sky, they all have very similar layouts of an alt text button that will pop up whenever you've added an image or a graphic, where you can add in descriptions there. And if you are a social media management tool user, so the likes of Sprout or Hootsuite, these tools also come with an add alt text feature where you can directly add in the descriptions that get uploaded when they automatically publish the post to your relevant profiles. And really helpfully with the likes of Sprout and Hootsuite is that they come with an AI-assisted alt text generator, and it's a really helpful starting point where it'll analyze the image or graphic that you've uploaded for you, and they'll analyze and pop out an alt text description that it recommends that you can use as like a foundation just to speed up the process of adding alt text features. So that's a whiz through on alt text. We'll jump into video captions now. So video captions refer to the text overlay that you see on videos where they transcribe both spoken dialogue and sound effects. They're slightly different from subtitles, which will typically transcribe spoken dialogue only, but I know that kind of colloquially they are used interchangeably, but that's the little kind of specific difference that they make. And captions ultimately allows deaf or hard of hearing individuals access a piece of audiovisual content, and it's a little bit more of a holistic way for them to consume the video content itself. Also really useful to know is that video captions are actually more engaging for those audiences who may not be disabled, but they prefer using their mobiles with their sound turned off, which can be up to about 80% of users depending on the platform. And so if they're watching a video with the sound turned off, captions actually help invite that extra engagement because they can still get the context of the video without necessarily having to unmute the video piece itself. So there's different kind of levels to support that you can have for disabled, but also like non-disabled communities as well, with these accessibility features. And like with alt text, captions are all about essentially ensuring readability and clarity for the audience who are using these captions just to access the piece of content. And to kind of improve that readability, we recommend a maximum of 2 lines per video frame, just to again help with kind of pacing and match reading speeds. Similarly, make sure a caption is visible for at least 2 seconds, just to, again, mimic kind of average reading speeds and time it'll take for people to kind of flick through what a caption is saying. Double check the accuracy of any auto-generated captions. We'll jump into this a little bit later, but some features will, some editing softwares will have an auto-generate caption feature, which will pop out, again, an automatic transcript of what the video dialogue is saying. But it's just important to check that accuracy. And finally, add a color border to captions so that they're easily seen. Really important for videos where the background will change, the lighting will change, depending on your different clips you may be using. And so a color background, kind of like the examples that I've left on the bottom right there, is just really useful just to make sure that the captions are always easily able to be read in front of kind of the videos that they're laid on top of. And in terms of actually adding the captions, so you've got a couple of options. You've got things like Instagram edits and TikTok itself within the platform, where you'll have like a captions icon or button where you can add in the captions themselves there. Or you've got a little bit more desktop-based software like CapCut or Canva, where they will also have an add captions button where they will auto-generate the captions. But with Canva and CapCut, you have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to the look of the caption itself, and you could always tailor it to something that suits your brand a little bit better as well. So there's lots of different software pieces out there where you could add captions to your video and make it a little bit easier. The next one that we'll whiz through is talking about color contrast. So when we're talking about color contrast and accessibility, it refers to the brightness between text and its background. When colors in the foreground and background end up being too similar, it can be hard to distinguish for people who have visual impairments, have color blindness, or simply just have low vision. And the examples there on the screen are an example of what poor color contrast and good contrast look like. So on the left, a light blue against a light white. For someone with color blindness, a light white text against that background light blue color would be really hard to read, in comparison to the good contrast there with the light orange and the dark black text would be so much more easier to read. And it's just things like that that's worth considering when it comes to the idea of color contrast. And so when looking to actually make color combinations in your graphics, or even just in things like your logos, that are optimal for users with color blindness or visual impairments, it's recommended to follow the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the WCAG, who have set up kind of accepted standards of color contrast. The first level of kind of accepted color contrast is the AA level, which is the standard level that is typically required or like named in laws like the EAA law when it comes to digital content and making sure that it's accessible for all communities. And then there's the level up, which is a little bit more stricter and more comprehensive, which is the AAA level. And there's all sorts of different ratios of like contrast that you have to meet for each of these levels, but a really easy way that you can kind of input and check if essentially your color contrast meet the standards is that there's a lot of free tools online, free websites like colorcontrast.cc, which is the example I've got here, where if you've got the hex codes of the colors that you're planning to use or you have used in your graphics and you just want to check that they meet color contrast standards, you can input those hex codes into these types of websites. And it will tell you if it meets the AA standard or the AAA standard. And if it doesn't, some of them will also actually recommend you different hex codes that you could use that actually would help you meet the AA and the AAA standards. So again, they're really good to look into and they're free to access online. And so really it's just something that I recommend if you're just not sure if a certain color combination meets certain standards. Next one we'll jump into is text size. So when it comes to text size in social media, this is a really good example on the image here. So when you design content on a desktop, everything might look fine, but on the phone, and I'm hoping it's purposefully really tiny, and I'm struggling to read it as well, but it says, your text size is too small to read, it's ant-sized. And in the context of social media, especially where it's typically consumed on smaller screens like mobiles, text size affects ultimately what is and isn't legible in terms of copy in your designs, in your captions itself. And it's especially impactful for people, again, with visual impairments, but also people with learning disabilities like dyslexia and other kind of cognitive impairments, where if a text is hard to read or challenging to read from size alone, it becomes a bit of an obstacle or a challenge to actually consume the content piece itself, leading to kind of audience disengagement, and ultimately a less kind of resonated audience that you're able to reach. And ultimately, the goal of sticking to appropriate text size is to, one, prevent eye strain, so make it an actual enjoyable experience for our audiences to actually consume our content, and reduce that mental effort taken to read a copy, so content is as easy and accessible as possible, so then we invite as much kind of engagement and encourage as much engagement from audiences as possible. And while there aren't any kind of accepted, officially mandated standards for text size, a lot of social media experts in the field will have like a rough consensus on kind of the text sizes that they tend to use. So when it comes to titles in your graphics or carousel, a minimum of 95 point text size and a maximum of 150 is recommended. When it comes to the actual like bodies of text that you may have in your graphics, a minimum of 36 and a maximum of 60. And for video captions, a minimum of 40 text, a point for text size, and then a maximum of 60 is generally, again, the consensus that social media, content creators tend to follow. And finally, the last feature that I'm going to run you through is emojis. Now, when we think about why emojis matter, every emoji has a unique description attached to it. And for those who are reading content using assistive tech, like with screen readers, any emojis that the screen reader comes across in written text, like in your social media captions, it will actually read the emoji's officially assigned description. Now, this could be a problem for accessibility because emoji descriptions can vary depending on the platform, browser, or the device that an emoji is being used on. So the example on the screen here with this one house emoji is that there's 4 different descriptions attached to it. And if the description isn't necessarily what you intended to get across in the rest of your text, it can end up being a very confusing experience. Same with if it's a very long description, so the idea of old house versus describing a derelict house can change kind of the experience that someone using a screen reader is having when they're consuming a caption audibly. And I'm hoping this audio plays, but we've got an example of what a screen reader sounds like when it is reading five emojis that are left in like a string. So hopefully this.
Ever wonder how emojis sound to someone using a screen reader?
Red heart and labeled graphic, red heart eyes and labeled graphic eyes, clapping hands and labeled graphic, clapping hands sign, rainbow and labeled graphic, rainbow, flexed biceps and labeled graphic, flexed biceps. You got this.
So hopefully that wasn't too jarring, and I hope the audio played, but it wasn't too jarring. And so that example really shows like when assistive text reads out an emoji along with the rest of the copy, it can end up being really hard to understand. It can end up mixing up the meaning of the text. So again, thinking about the descriptions that are attached to emojis. If the description isn't what we intended to get across within the kind of overall text itself, it can end up mixing up the meaning that you're trying to get across in your caption or in your message. It can be tedious to listen to. So what looks like only 5 emojis in that short example there was actually a really long passage of like different emoji descriptions being read through by a monotonous kind of robotic voice that the screen readers are tied to. And ultimately it can make the informational message hard to understand because it's hard to decipher what is the emoji description and what is actually the normal body of text that we want them to read. And so I'm not saying never use emojis in your caption. They can be useful to get across certain moods and tones across in your content. But if you are going to use emojis, here are some tips to essentially just use them a little bit more accessibly. So first one is to use them sparingly. So like in that example, please avoid kind of long strings of emoji passages, because that can get quite confusing and just a very jarring experience for someone using a screen reader to kind of process. To put emojis at the end of your written content, so then at least you get across the main body of text that you want to communicate to your audiences before the emoji description kind of comes in. Avoid using them as bullet points or in the middle of text, again, to kind of avoid disrupting or minimize the disruption that emojis can have when read aloud by a screen reader. And to double check emoji descriptions and just think, can I use this emoji if I'm trying to be accessible? Does the kind of emoji descriptions attached to it, do they match with what I want to say? Just to kind of avoid that confusion. And so those were all of the accessibility features. And now I'm just going to run you quickly through a couple of common kind of mistakes that we see popping up and what you can do in terms of avoiding those mistakes and what you can do to kind of get it right from the start. And the first kind of mistake that we see popping up is not double checking auto-generated features. So like we mentioned earlier with the AI generated descriptions and the auto-generated captions, they can be really helpful when it comes to saving time and giving you like a foundation to start with. But it's really important to be aware that they are not always accurate, and we shouldn't necessarily just be accepting kind of whatever the technology is spitting out back at us as like something that we can use. So it's really recommended that you're always double checking anything that is auto-generated or AI generated when it comes to accessibility features. And a really important aspect is to watch out for commonly mistranscribed elements. So things like names, acronyms, or any industry-specific language that may be mentioned in your content. Homophones like affect or effect is a good example. And also, especially when it comes to video captions, things like missing words can end up changing the meaning of, a certain piece of spoken dialogue. So in this example, there's the he was confident versus he was not confident. So making sure like little aspects like those aren't missed in any like auto-generated captions you may be using is a really good kind of area to be double checking as well when looking at kind of auto-generated and AI content. The second mistake that we see kind of cropping up is the misuse of alt text. So ultimately, alt text we recommend is only used for that brief description that we mentioned earlier in this webinar. And so because using alt text inaccurately or not optimized can actually create a more confusing experience for the audiences who are relying on alt text to consume a piece of content. So we recommend, avoiding inaccurate uses of alt text that you may see other people, kind of like other content creators or like social media content using them for, but avoid using alt text for things like inside jokes, giving photo credits, or putting keywords to help with SEO purposes. And also just like the recommendation is to avoid using phrases like image of or picture of, because it can end up feeling quite repetitive for someone who's looking through maybe like a carousel post. If it always starts with something that says image of XYZ, it can just kind of make a less engaging or like less fun experience to kind of consume the content if it starts with that same repetitive phrasing. So just another way to optimize your alt text and make sure that you're using it in a way that feels right for the users who are using them. And the final mistake that we'll run you through is inconsistency when it comes to applying accessibility habits. So it's really great, if you walk away knowing all these accessibility practices, but if you're using them sporadically or just as like a one-time fix, it won't necessarily deliver the value of kind of consistent accessibility practices in your social media content over time. And so we would recommend, making sure that accessibility is a non-negotiable in your content creation checklist, whether that is, it's the first thing that you do or the last thing that you do, whatever it may be, that there is a space for you to, cover and review all the accessibility features that you can add to a piece of content. So block out time to add accessibility features like an alt text description to all the graphics you've created. Block out time to kind of go through the captions for any video content, and make sure that you've added them in, that they're kind of all within branding, that they've all been double checked for kind of accuracy, if they've been auto-generated, things like that, and actually carve out that time and space within your content creation time, just to kind of make sure that you're actually sticking to this. And if you do work with other team members, or if there are any other kind of stakeholders who are contributing to your social media content, to make sure that they're also up to speed with the importance of accessibility and why it's there and why it's important to be consistent with it, and what features that you're actively trying to make sure that are always consistently embedded into your social media content. So those are the common 3 mistakes. And if you felt inspired by this webinar today, I really encourage you to go away, pick one of these options maybe to start things off, and go away and practice one kind of accessibility practice into like your next content batch, or just getting into the habit of things. So for example, you could practice writing an alt text description for the next post that you've got scheduled. Go explore one of the video editing softwares and see what its kind of add captions feature looks like. If you've got brand colors, find the hex codes, run them through like a color contrast checker, and just see if there's any combinations that do or don't work, and kind of highlight which ones that don't and should be avoided, things like that. And if you're a Canva user, really helpful, Canva AI, actually, if you put in the prompt, does my design meet accessibility standards, it'll actually do an overview kind of accessibility check for you, and it'll recommend where it thinks it may not meet certain accessibility standards, and it'll flag that up with you so you can kind of follow that up. So again, like another way where you can kind of speed up the process of accessibility practices. But yeah, those are just some things to hopefully get you inspired and get you started with actioning something to do with accessibility after this webinar. And so I'll just hand back to Kerry to wrap up a couple of bits before we open the floor to any questions.
Thank you so much, Ramin. I actually used that 4th point the other day in Canva, and I realised I overwhelmed a little bit because there were over 200 slides in my deck. It was for a very thorough training course, and it didn't like that. So I learned to do it a kind of a section at a time, but it was really useful. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and do my little pitch for the Social for Good Accelerator. If you haven't come to our webinars before and you're not familiar with the Accelerator, I'm just going to tell you what it is for 2 minutes, because all of our webinars, all of our expertise are drawn from this training program that we launched a couple of years ago. If you're interested in a training program that was built with charities, for charities, then the Accelerator is it. I realised that there wasn't really a great training program out there that didn't include generic advice, and actually we know that non-profits have quite specific challenges and lack of resources. So we built the Accelerator with that in mind. It's a 2-month course, although you can take as long to do all the modules as you'd like. There are pre-recorded modules, but also live calls. And the live calls are becoming one of the most popular parts of the course. Not that the modules aren't all brilliant, but we've learned that actually coming together on the live calls with other charities and with our expert trainers as well make those like really, really rewarding. We've had several conversations with people that have been through the Accelerator, and the peer support and community is something that they always talk about. And then there's also a consultancy element to the Accelerator, which is a one-to-one deep dive at the end of the course with somebody within the Social for Good team, depending on the challenge that you have. It could be that you want to get some feedback on a strategy that you've developed. It could be you want to create a LinkedIn strategy together or build an ad campaign. There's all sorts of ways that you can use our expertise. And our lovely colleague Nina, who you might have seen on previous webinars, she holds an Ask Me Anything community call every 2 weeks. And these are great as well to pop in and just have someone in your corner that you can ask her anything, literally. So Dome has put a link to the accelerator program in the chat. If training is something that you're looking at and you'd love a bit of community with other charities over the next few months, we have another cohort starting in September. They're fairly small groups. There are only 12 people per cohort, just to make sure that that everybody's getting enough one-to-one time. So yeah, to have a look at it and see how you feel about it for September. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before I open the floor to questions and hand back to Ramin is we'd really love to get some feedback on our webinars. There's a QR code up there on the screen. If there's any feedback you have, things that we could do better, topics you'd like to see us cover in the future, anything at all, please let us know. We put a lot of time and effort into doing good webinars every 12 months. We want to make sure that they're actually making a difference for those of you out there that are coming along. Okay, so that's it from me. Are there any questions that anybody has for Ramin about the topic that we've covered today?
Yeah, there's a question from Bianca. I don't know if you can see it in the start list.
Yeah, shall I read it out for you, Ramin?
Yeah, go on.
Is there a guide on what emoji we should use, or what they would sound like, the color checker or an emoji sound checker?
I'm not 100% sure. So I know that the little emojis will pop up. So like an Apple user, they'll pop up if you hover over them. If you're a desktop user, I'm interested to see what the emoji list is, Kerry, that you shared in the chat.
Yeah, I don't know if that covers the spoken words for each emoji. Like you said, it varies across devices, but that's one resource I was aware of that might be useful.
Yeah. Bianca, what we can do is, if you can drop your email or your LinkedIn, I'll see if any other members of the team have like a resource that they use specifically. But again, because it is so varied across, again, devices and platforms, and just kind of within the emoji descriptions themselves, yeah, there's nothing kind of like, I think, fully concrete when it comes to emoji descriptions. But if you're still here and you can drop your email or some way to contact you, I'll see if other members of the team have anything.
Or you could drop us an email, hello@socialforgood.co.uk, put a question for Ramin and it will get forwarded to her nice and quickly.
Awesome. Thanks, Bianca. Wait, I've got it.
And there's another question from Rob. So Ramin, Rob works for a small charity that runs monthly 30-minute Facebook Live sessions with the recordings later uploaded to YouTube. Due to limited capacity, we rarely have the resources to review and correct the auto-generated captions. However, after each session, we publish a detailed blog that summarises the discussion and key points. Would linking to the blog be an acceptable alternative, or are fully edited captions still expected? Great question.
I think, yeah, that's a really good question, Rob. I think the fact that you're doing what you can within the remits with the auto-generated captions is commendable, like on its own. When we say, try and avoid those mistakes, it is, again, within the remits of like team capacity and things like that. So yeah, what you're saying with linking to the blog, just to make sure that if there was anything major kind of miscommunicated within an auto-generated caption section, maybe, is a really good kind of safety net you can make for yourself within kind of like team capacity and what you have available. In the grand scheme of things, with how technology is improving, I'd say that, you're more likely to find accuracies as opposed to inaccuracies with kind of auto-generated features. It's just a nice kind of add-on you can do. But if you're, speaking in kind of the realisticness of limited capacity, I think what you're suggesting with kind of linking to the blog, just to make sure that it is correctly summarizing, is useful. Yeah.
And yeah, we'd hope that the technology that auto-generates the captions will get better. It's always tricky with proper nouns, isn't it? And especially places. But yeah, I think what you said, Ramin, is really good advice for Rob. Any other questions from anybody before we finish and go off for our lunch? Hopefully you've enjoyed your lunch whilst we've been learning. No? Okay, well, we'll hang around for a couple of minutes, but thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, we've got one from Lucy.
One from Lucy.
We've just started implementing alt text on our website, but as you can imagine, we have lots and lots of pages to review. Would you recommend eventually putting alt text on every page? For example, we have news stories on our blog page from 3+ years ago. Should we be in a rush to ensure they're all up to date? Oh, bless you, this is only me and my manager and our team, and I think it's an overwhelming thing about the pressures. I think if it becomes common practice for all the new content that you're putting out, don't put so much pressure on, blog content from like 3+ years ago. As long as you're kind of keeping consistent practice moving forward, eventually your website viewers, your website visitors, your audiences would understand that this is a new process that you're implementing. And as long as you're consistent with that, I think they would then understand if there's any instances of, alt text missing from older blog graphics and things like that. So I think you're okay to kind of prioritize first the stuff that's going out new. And if you have time, look at maybe populating alt text for some of your more popular blog posts. So the ones that if you see, from 3+ years ago, if you see one still getting lots of views or clicks, maybe that's one that you prioritize, things like that. But don't put too much pressure on yourself. Hope that answers it.
Well, thanks, Lucy. Okay.
Oh, no worries.
Okay, I think we're done. I noticed a few people joining late, so we will pop this webinar onto our YouTube channel, and you should automatically get emailed a recording if you did miss the beginning bit. But a massive thank you to Ramin for sharing your accessibility insights and advice, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Have a lovely Monday afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.